Angela here. Today I'm going to show you 6 basic watercolor techniques and how to erase. A lot of people think watercolor is hard and unforgiving. I'm about to prove you wrong. So the materials you need are listed. I will go more into the brands and brush sizes in the description below. Student grade for the watercolor and the brushes are totally fine. I do recommend good quality paper though, and I will go in more into that later. And what you can actually do is take the tube of paint and squeeze out all the paint into a tray like this, let it dry, and re-wet it whenever you need. Okay, let's start with wet on wet. First, get a really wet brush, clean brush, and apply a nice thick layer of water. Then get another brush with pigment and apply that right on there. And the water will carry the pigment around, creating an interesting effect. You can also add a second color and let the two colors bleed into each other. And you want the brush to be really wet when you do this. This is why it's really important to have good paper, because this doesn't work very well with student grade paper. It starts to warp and the paper starts to fuzz up and shred. The next thing I want to show you is wet on dry. So you want to first apply a layer of color, let that dry completely, and then grab a brush and then you can paint over that, and it will allow you to create defined edges and the colors won't mix together. For dry on dry, you want to paint a layer first, let it completely dry, and then grab a brush with very little water and lots of pigment, and you can create textured brush strokes like this. For salt on wet, you want to apply a nice wet layer of paint first. And before that dries, grab a pinch of salt and sprinkle it on top. And just leave it there. We're going to come back to this at the end of the video and see what happens. So in watercolor, to blend, I usually will apply a darker layer of color on top of a dry base coat, and then take a clean wet brush and use that to spread out the pigment and create a gradient. So I think the hardest part about watercolor is that you need to plan out the highlights and the negative spaces ahead of time, because you want the white of the paper to show through. Let me show you what I mean. So here I'm just using that wet on wet technique. Want some strong highlights, you want to leave the white of the paper showing. I'm using the blending technique here. There you go. Now I said I would show you how watercolor is forgiving. What you should do is always have a piece of paper towel near you. That's going to be your eraser. And when the paint is wet, you can very easily erase by wiping it off with a paper towel and taking a clean brush with water, wetting it a little, and wiping it off, just like that. When the paint begins to dry, it's a little harder to erase, but do the same thing. Take a clean brush with water, go over it, wet it, and wipe it off with a paper towel, and then do it again. More water, and dab it with the paper towel. And do this a few times until the color is not as noticeable. And this technique only works if you have good paper. Otherwise it's gonna warp and shred. And it's not foolproof. Once it's dry, you'll still see a little faint highlight of it. So try to catch your mistakes before they dry. Lastly, I said we would check on the salt and wet after it dried completely. So you could take a clean dry brush and just brush off the salt. And there you go. You get like this kind of snowflake effect. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let me know in the comments below if you have specific questions or there's something that you want to learn. You can check out my watercolors on Instagram. Also remember to hit like, subscribe, and the notification bell, and I will see you next time. Have fun and make art.